You try to explain. You think you're being fair, but you're only showing that you still need acceptance. Do you know what's even crueler? Watching a man destroy himself with words, desperately trying to prove his innocence to those who have already condemned him. It's like watching someone drown in shallow water. Salvation is within reach, but he insists on sinking. You've been that man. Maybe you still are. The one who writes long messages justifying a simple decision, who explains every action as if life were a courtroom, and he the perpetual defendant. Sartre knew exactly what that meant. Self-deception, masked as transparency. You're not being honest, you're pleading for absolution. But here's a hard truth. Over-explaining is a disguised form of submission to external judgment. Sartre teaches that true freedom only arises when you abandon the need to be understood and begin to exist by your own choosing, not by others' acceptance. This cannot go on. Enough of being the man who justifies himself until his dignity is eroded. If you've ever tried to convince someone that you're not what you seem, comment below. And if this video reminds you of someone who constantly over-explains themselves, share it now. Maybe it will be the last time they need to hear this so plainly. The cycle of endless explanations is more destructive than you realize. It works like this. Someone judges you, you explain, and that explanation becomes new evidence against you. It's a perfect psychological trap. The more you try to escape, the more tangled you become. Over-explaining reveals three deadly weaknesses. First, you still believe you can control others' perceptions through words. Second, you can't accept who you truly are. You need a better version to present to the world. Third, you've turned your existence into a constant plea for forgiveness. The man who over-explains isn't being transparent. His insecurity is. Every justification is a confession. I'm not sure I deserve to be here. Every lengthy explanation signals, I need your approval to exist. That's why the more you talk, the less credibility you have. Look around you. Who are the respected men? Are they those who justify every move, or those who act and let their actions speak? The world doesn't respect those who over-justify. It respects those who don't need to justify themselves. It's a cruel law, but it's the law. You transformed your life into a public tribunal where you are simultaneously the defendant, the defense attorney, and the judge declaring yourself guilty. Sartre would demonstrate that this is not honesty, it is existential cowardice. You hide behind words to avoid taking responsibility for simply being who you are. Sartre defines self-deception as lying to oneself to evade accountability. Over-explanation is one of the most subtle forms of self-deception that exists. When you try to appear better than you truly are, you have already ceased to be free. You have become a prisoner of the image you feel compelled to maintain. For Sartre, human freedom is radical and terrifying. It means that you are entirely responsible for your choices, no excuses, no justifications, no mitigating circumstances. Yet most people evade this responsibility by hiding behind endless explanations about why they did what they did. The French philosopher held a brutal view on this. When you live trying to be well understood, you are not truly living. You are acting. You have become an actor, attempting to convince an audience that you deserve applause. But the audience has already made up its mind about you before you even open your mouth. Justifying self-deception works like this. You make a choice, but instead of owning that it was your free decision, you craft an elaborate narrative about how there were no options, how the situation demanded it, or how anyone would have done the same. You rob yourself of credit and responsibility for your own life. Sartre would say you are treating yourself as a thing, not as a free human being. Things need explanations. They have causes, effects, justifications. But free beings simply exist and choose. The difference is stark. One is an object of analysis, the other is an agent of action. The desire to be understood becomes a prison because you stop living for yourself and start living to be interpreted. But living to be interpreted is living as a reflection, not as existence. It's accepting that your reality depends on external approval, which is the most complete denial of the freedom Sartre advocated. True freedom requires accepting that you might be misunderstood and proceeding anyway, because the understanding of others is not a prerequisite for your existence. You come first, interpretations come after, and if they come. I know a man who destroyed a 5-year relationship by over-explaining. She came home late. He asked where she had been. Evasive response. Instead of simply admitting that something was wrong and taking action, he spent 3 hours trying to understand the situation. Every question he asked sounded like desperation. Every explanation she gave sounded like a lie. But the worst part wasn't the suspicion of betrayal. It was what happened afterward. When he found out she truly had someone else, instead of just ending things, he spent weeks trying to understand why. He sent long messages asking where he went wrong, what he could have done differently, how they could resolve the situation. She blocked him on everything. And do you know why? It wasn't because of the betrayal. It was because of the desperation for explanations. A betrayal can be a mistake, but a man begging for explanations is a man without dignity. And once dignity is lost, it's impossible to regain. The cruelest part? He still believes that trying to talk was mature, that seeking understanding was rational, and that giving her chances to explain was fair. But maturity would be accepting reality and acting accordingly. Rationality would be recognizing that traitors don't deserve explanations. Fairness would be preserving your own dignity. 2 years later, he still sporadically sends messages to get closure. He still tries to understand. He still explains himself. He turned a betrayal that lasted a few months into a humiliation that's been ongoing for years. Because he can't accept that some things don't need to be understood, they need to be cut away. The need for explanation reveals an immature belief that the world is just, and if you present enough arguments, people will see the truth and treat you better. But the world doesn't work that way. People have already made up their minds about you before you speak. Your explanations only confirm that you care too much about their opinion. Explaining is always reacting, and those who react are always at a disadvantage. You position yourself as someone who needs to justify themselves, which automatically gives the other person the power to judge you. It's a devastating power reversal. You hand over your authority to someone who has already decided to use it against you. The diagnosis is clear. You still believe you can control how others see you through words. But perception isn't rational. It's emotional. People feel first, then justify what they felt. If someone has already decided you're guilty, your explanations will only fuel that conviction. The correct strategy is the opposite. Accept that you will be misunderstood and recognize that it's not your problem. When you stop trying to control others' perceptions, you reclaim mastery over your own life. When you cease to explain yourself, you compel others to confront your raw existence without filters, justifications, or excuses. Strategic silence becomes a formidable weapon because it forces others to fill the void with their projections. And more often than not, these projections reveal more about the observer than about the subject of judgment. You become a mirror reflecting the nature of whoever is looking at you. Now, I will tell you about another man. A department head publicly accused during a meeting of lack of collaboration with other sectors. The entire room watching, awaiting his justification. He simply said, "Think what you want," and resumed reading his documents. An awkward silence ensued. The accuser lingered, expecting a debate that never materialized. She pressed, "Aren't you going to defend yourself?" He raised his gaze, looked directly at her, and replied, "I don't need to convince you." And that was it. The meeting ended without explanations. But something interesting happened. During the week, 3 different people approached him privately. Not to confront, but to understand. Because a man who does not explain himself arouses curiosity. A man who does not justify himself gains involuntary respect. 6 months later, he was promoted. The person who accused him was transferred to another department. Coincidence? No. Organizations respect those who do not beg for respect. The corporate world may be political, but one thing is certain. No one promotes those who humiliate themselves publicly with desperate explanations. The most fascinating part? When asked how he handled the situation, he said something that sums it all up. "It's not my job to make people understand me. It's my job to do my work." Simple, straightforward, free. This man understood a fundamental truth. Explanations are for subordinates. Authority is not explained. It is enforced through presence and results. When you accept the role of someone who needs to justify himself, you automatically accept a subordinate position in the social hierarchy. How to practically stop explaining yourself? First, develop presence and closing phrases. Think what you want. I don't need to convince you. You don't need to understand, just respect. These phrases cut at the root any attempt to position you as the defendant. Second, assume the decision as the final act. Action is greater than justification. When someone questions your choices, instead of explaining why you made them, simply reaffirm that you did. Yes, I decided this. Yes, I acted this way. Yes, it was my choice. End of story. Third, practice authentic silence. Not the silence of someone fleeing, but the silence of someone who has already made a decision. There is a stark difference between the two. The first is defensive, the second is authoritative. Those who do not feel the need to explain themselves compel the world to confront their raw existence, and that commands respect. Fourth, accept that you will be misunderstood, and that this is not your problem. Most interpretations others make about you reveal more about them than about you. It is not your responsibility to correct others' distorted perceptions. It is your responsibility to live in truth. Fifth, replace the need to be understood with the need to be respected. Understanding is optional. Respect is mandatory. You can live without being understood, but you cannot live without being respected. And respect comes from your stance, not your explanations. If any part of this message has made you reflect on how many times you've humiliated yourself trying to explain yourself, mark this moment in the comments. And if it resonated so far, leave a like. Not for me, but for yourself, as a commitment to change. Transformation begins when you realize that your dignity is worth more than others' understanding, that your peace is worth more than external approval, that your freedom is worth more than the correct interpretation from someone who doesn't truly know you. Freedom doesn't start when you're understood. It begins when you stop begging to be understood. Sartre would say, stop explaining yourself. Live as if you've already decided who you are. You don't need to convince anyone. You only need to exist in truth, even when that makes others uncomfortable, even when it creates conflict, even when it makes you seem cold or arrogant, because arrogance is better than humiliation. Coldness is better than desperation. Solitude is better than companionship based on lies about who you are. The world is full of men who spend their lives justifying themselves, who have turned their existence into an endless audience of judgment, who have measured their dignity by others' approval. Will you continue to be one of them, or will you accept Sartre's brutal challenge of freedom? Now tell me, are you still going to try to be understood, or have you already understood the game? Write this down. It's your contract of breaking free from the need for approval. This is the moment when you stop being a defendant in your own life and become its author. And if you want to keep hearing truths that no one else will dare to tell you, subscribe. Here, illusions do not survive. Here, you won't find cheap consolation or stage-driven motivation. You will find applied philosophy to the brutal reality of relationships, power, and male dignity. Because ultimately, Sartre was right. You are condemned to be free. And being free means stopping explaining yourself to those who have already decided not to understand you.